Hello, learners. I welcome you to the third lecture of week one in the course Environmental Politics, Theories, Concepts, and Debates. In this week, we are trying to understand rise and growth of environmentalism. Till now, we have tried to understand that how environmentalism emerged, what was the context that led to the emergence of environmentalism, what were the various waves of environmentalism, and we also discussed that how political theory before emergence of green political theory has responded to environmental concerns. In today's lecture, we will be trying to understand green ideology, its meaning and nature. When we say green ideology, you see it's a very broad term which include various perspectives, various positions and ideologies relating to environmental concern. So in today's lecture, we will try to understand the definition of green ideology and also difference between environmentalism and ecologism and nature of green ideology. So this is the outline of the lecture. We are going to cover following aspect in today's lecture. So to begin with, the debate between environmentalism versus ecologism. As I mentioned in the beginning only, that green ideology is broadly used as an umbrella term that include various philosophies, ideologies, theories, and perspectives that keep the ecological concerns at the center. Now, there is a debate on the right term to be used for expressing these concerns. One group uses the term ecologism while other uses environmentalism. Now the question is that are these only two terms which can be used interchangeably? Actually not. Because ecologism and environmentalism, they are not merely, you see, two different terms. Rather, they represent two different perspectives and also focus. So we'll try to understand that what is the difference between environmentalism and ecologism. Andrew Haywood says that uh, environmentalism is a moderate or reformist approach. Why? Because it responds to the environment and its concern. But in this process, it does not question the conventional assumptions about the natural world. So it doesn't demand any kind of fundamental change in our very way of looking at environment or our very way of defining relation with nature. Yes, it wants certain modification in our behavior so that we can cope with the present crisis and we can deal with the issue of environmental degradation. So therefore, Henry Haywood says that it is a kind of moderate approach or a reformist approach. Now, ecologism. Haywood says that it demands a kind of radical socio-political change and emphasizes what? That there is a need for a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between human beings and the natural world. The way we have defined the relationship between human beings and natural world, ecologism demands that there should be change in that. Similar view has been expressed by Andrew Dobson. Dobson says that environmentalism is what? It is primarily a managerial approach. Why? Because it believes that the present environmental crisis can be resolved only by some modifications in the production and consumption pattern. So it has an approach of uh, managing the crisis, not going into the root cause of the problem, but only to see that what are the major factors responsible for the present crisis and how to manage that. So it doesn't speak of some deeper changes. But ecologism doesn't agree with this piecemeal and superficial change. It strongly argues for restructuring of our mode of social and political life. It says no, only by this incremental change, this piecemeal change, we cannot resolve the issue. We need total restructuring. And that's why Dobson says what? That I shall argue that environmentalism and ecologism need to be kept apart for the same reasons that liberalism and socialism, conservatism and nationalism need to be kept apart. You see, it is very important. When we talk about liberalism and socialism, we consider them to be a kind of opposite ideologies. And Dobson is saying what? That same kind of relation is there between environmentalism and ecologism. So now it is very clear that we cannot say these are merely two different terms. We cannot use it interchangeably. Rather, they are two different perspectives. Dobson further argues that the concern of environmentalist and ecologist may be same. Why? Because both of them are concerned with environmental issue, but their strategy to resolve those issues widely differs. Why? Because there is difference in their core beliefs. And then Dobson tries to explain what are those differences in their core beliefs. He raises 4 points. Now we'll try to understand that. Firstly, Dobson says that environmentalists do not necessarily subscribe to the limits to growth thesis, nor do they typically seek to dismantle industrialism. So, according to Dobson, environmentalists look for the solution, but they look for the solution within industrial framework, within the framework of productivism. And he also said that they do not even support the limits to growth thesis. Contrary to this, ecologism highlights this limit to growth. That there is a limits to growth. There is no possibility of continuing with the present mode of economy and protection of environment. And therefore they say, if we want solution, we need to dismantle industrialism. So this is first difference. Second, Dobson says that environmentalists are unlikely to argue for the intrinsic value of the non-human environment. They see non-human environment only as a resource for human being which has only instrumental value. They do not believe in their intrinsic value, while ecologism advocates the cause of intrinsic value of non-human environment. Third, environmentalists will typically believe that technology can solve the problem. So, Dobson says, for environmentalists, technology can be a solution to present crisis. But ecologism doesn't believe in that. It sees that technology has created this problem and therefore we should not search for solution within this problem. Fourth, environmentalists will not accept the suggestion that we need to reduce material production. They will not accept that in order to attain sustainability, we need to reduce production. While the ecologists, they say that unless and until we do talk about fundamental change in this, the crisis cannot be resolved. So on the basis of this, we can say that Dobson says that there are deeper differences in terms of core beliefs of environmentalists and ecologists. So now we have understood that how different are these two perspectives. Now we'll talk to, or we'll try to define green ideology. But before defining that, we need to discuss some of the major challenges in defining green ideology. Here we'll talk about the viewpoint of Andrew Vincent. He identifies three major problems in defining ecologism as an ideology. First, he says that many of the activists and thinkers who are engaged in green ideology, they do not consider it as an ideology. Most of them firstly argue that ecological concerns cannot be fitted into given political ideologies. Like British and German Greens, they gave a slogan, neither left nor right but forward. So what they are asserting that in practice, in social matters, in economic matters, we can find that left and right, these are two opposite ideology in terms of relation between classes, in terms of their view on property, in terms of their view on role of a state. But when it comes to their view in relation with environment, in relation with production, they both are rooted in industrialist framework. Jonathan Porritt, who is a very important name, who was associated with British Ecology Party for a long time, he says what? He says left and right both are dedicated to industrial growth, then to the expansion of the means of production. They both support materialist ethic, both support the cause of uncontrolled technological development, both rely on increasing centralization, both support large scale bureaucratic control, and both see this planet as something to be conquered. Both believe that big is beautiful. So, Porritt says that if you see left and right ideologies in terms of their view on production, having its impact on environment, they both are sailing in the same boat. That's why they are saying neither left nor right but forward. So supporters of green ideology, they claim that their fight is beyond the existing political ideologies. Why? Because all the existing political ideologies, according to supporter of green ideology, they operate within this power dominance framework, and therefore we should not expect from them any kind of sensitivity towards ecological concern. They have shown that the present politics cannot solve the issue of environment, and therefore we need to have an alternative politics. They say politics as we know, it can no longer deal with these environmental issues. Why? Because it shares the very mentality out of which they arose. Now, Porritt argues that it is very difficult to specify nature of green ideology and politics. He explained that what is the problem. Says what? That having written the last two general election manifestos for the Ecology Party, I would be hard put even to say what our ideology is. Our politics seems to be a fairly simple mixture of pragmatism and idealism, common sense and vision. And then he says, if that's an ideology, it's of a rather different sort from those that dominates our lives today. So what we have seen that uh, Porritt says that there is a problem in defining green ideology because it includes various perspectives. But you see, Andrew Vincent says what? That we have to accept that it is an ideology because basically, when we talk about any ideology, it should have certain features. What should be those features? First, Uh, it must have a kind of concept of the nature of reality. There should be assessment of the present situation, and then suggestion for an alternative, and also a roadmap to attain that alternative. So Vincent says what? When we look at green ideology, it has all these four components, and therefore green ideology qualifies to be an ideology. Now we'll see what is the another challenge highlighted by Vincent in defining green ideology. So the second point which has been raised by Vincent is the troublesome relationship between contemporary eco philosophy, ideology, and practical movement of ecology. So, what do we expect? We expect that there should be a close connection, a symmetry between philosophical thought, ideological, and practical politics. They should be in alignment with each other. But what do we find in case of movements on ecology and eco-philosophy? That this connection is missing. Like Dobson points out that the politics of ecology does not follow the same ground rules as its philosophy. So there is a gap between basically eco-philosophy and social practice, and that also makes it very difficult for us to define green ideology. Third, uh, as we mentioned at the beginning only, that there is a lot of diversity within green ideology and movement. You see, in one way, we can see this diversity as a mark of richness of the ideology, but at the same time, it makes the task of defining it difficult. Like Dobson says that just as there are many socialisms and many liberalisms, so there are many ecologisms. It has been observed that different branches of green ideology, they derive their inspiration from different thought traditions, and sometimes it has been observed that when it comes to their ecological positions, it is not only different, sometimes they take opposite positions, and that's why it becomes very very difficult to define green ideology. So these are the major challenges in defining green ideology. Now we'll try to define it and to identify its major features. uh, Dobson says that there are two ways of defining green ideology. One, he says maximalist, which he finds a rigid approach, and second is a minimalist approach. We'll try to understand what are these two approaches. Maximalist approach is called a rigid approach. Why? Because it talks about very stringent terms and condition for defining any position as a political ecologist position. As Dobson says that maximalist commentators define ecologism tightly. So people and ideas will have to pass stringent tests before they can properly be called political ecologist. While when we talk about minimalist, it is a flexible approach. Why? Because it doesn't put such stringent terms and condition. It can be called more inclusive in the sense that all those positions which express some kind of concern for environment, minimalist framework easily accommodate them within green ideology. So therefore Dobson says that minimalists cast their net wider so that the definition of ecologism is subject to fewer or less stringent conditions. However, he himself prefers to define green ideology in a maximalist position. If we talk about defining green ideology, and already we have seen that it is full of diversity, so we need to understand what are the major sub traditions within green ideology. So broadly speaking, there are three positions: modernist ecology, social ecology, and deep ecology. Basically, you see, modernist ecology is what? It is a kind of uh, based on managerial approach, and which wants to find out solution for ecological crisis, but within the industrialist and capitalist framework. It doesn't talk about any kind of deeper change or fundamental change like eco-capitalism, eco-conservatism. Now, social ecology, it can be called comparatively a radical approach. Why? Because it says that there is a close relation between uh, social and political structures and environmental degradation. So if we have to address environmental degradation, we need to do what? We need to restructure socio-political framework. That's why it is a radical approach. And third is deep ecology. It suggests deeper fundamental change in our very perception of looking at the nature. And therefore, it talks about intrinsic value of nature, it talks about ecocentric perspective, it talks about biocentric equality, and therefore, it is a kind of most radical approach. So, green ideology consists of mainly these three approaches. Now we'll try to understand some of the general feature of green ideology. So green ideology challenges the modernist human centric approach, which consider human beings as the owner of the nature and nature as the object to be controlled, conquered, and exploited. So most of the sub-traditions within green ideology, with an exception to maybe modernist ecology, they all are critical to this human centric approach. It considers this arrogance of humanism responsible for present deplorable state of environment. It considers growth mania, that is obsession with growth, looking for more and more production that leads to productivism. It considers this tendency of human society to be responsible for environmental degradation. And that's why it advocates for what? Steady state economy. Further, it warns that this unlimited growth model is neither possible nor desirable. Two things. On the one hand, it is not possible, but it is not even desirable. We will talk about Kenneth Boulding's idea of a spaceship Earth, which also says that this unlimited growth model is not possible at all. In his idea of spaceship Earth, he does what? He compares this Earth with a spaceship which has limited wealth and suggests that human society must change its consumption pattern in order to survive. So it means that this Earth is just like a spaceship having limited wealth, and there is no external supply. So we need to be very careful that how we are going to use this wealth. We need to use it wisely, slowly, and therefore unlimited growth model is not possible. Similar view has been expressed by E.F. Schumacher, who also highlights the unfeasibility of unlimited growth and emphasizes the need for an economical and enlightened use of natural resources as well as steady economy approach. Here we will discuss one very important passage from Schumacher's book Small is Beautiful, and we'll end our today's lecture with this only. He writes what? He says, when we see economic growth from the point of view of economics, physics, chemistry, technology, then it appears that there is no limit. We can keep on going. But the moment we see it from the perspective of environmental science, we find absolutely a different picture. He says an attitude of life which seeks fulfillment in the single minded pursuit of wealth, that is materialism. He says this framework doesn't fit into this world. Why? Because it contains within itself no limiting principle, while the environment in which it is placed is strictly limited. And that's why we need to rethink our way of consumption, our way of production. And that's why he says we need to go with the idea that small is beautiful. Why? Because this idea will be in tune with the nature of the planet, which has its own limitations. So, from this passage and our previous discussion, we have understood that green ideology basically is, you see, a very comprehensive framework which includes various perspectives, ideologies, and position. Now, these are some of the references that I have used in my lecture, and you can use these references as suggested reading. Like, this book is very, very important book to have a broader understanding. I would also like to suggest that you must read this. Small is Beautiful. We'll talk about this book again and again in our lecture. Uh, Now, these are activity questions. First, you have to differentiate between ecologism and environmentalism. We have discussed it in detail in the beginning of the lecture. Second, what do you understand by minimalist and maximalist approach of defining green ideology? I would suggest you to go through Dobson's this book to understand this a minimalist and maximalist position in detail. Now, you need to think over one position, that do you think that the idea of steady state economy would be acceptable in the present times, where we assess development in terms of GDP, GNP? Within that framework, do you think that the idea of a steady state economy would be acceptable? And if we have to make it stable, if we have to make it acceptable, then what kinds of efforts should be made to make it acceptable? This is a situation over which you need to think critically and try to find out solution to it. So thank you. Thank you, learners, for joining the lecture. In this lecture, we try to understand that what are the various debates uh, regarding definition of green ideology, what are the differences between the two positions, that is environmentalism and ecologism. And we also try to understand some of the general features of green ideology, and we also discussed about briefly about the major sub traditions within green ideology. About those sub traditions we will discuss in coming lectures in detail. So thank you for joining. Go through the lecture, and if you have any doubt, any query, please feel free to post your queries in the discussion forum. Now we'll meet in the next lecture. Thank you.